The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Mike Volkov here. Happy post-Easter. Happy post-Passover. Hope everyone's doing well. You're here for AI risks, ethics, and compliance programs. This is the hot topic that we see every day, sort of AI and AI this, AI that. So I wanted to have a webinar on this just to address some of the just a couple housekeeping matters. I uploaded the slides and take a look at them if you can download them. If you can't get them for whatever reason, just email me at volkovlaw.com and I'll send you a set right after the show, as we say, after the show. Anyways, good to see everybody. I'm glad you could make it. We had a lot of people sign up for this. It's kind of like third-party risk, kind of like anti-corruption from years ago. This seems to be on people's minds, and hopefully I can sort of try to put this in perspective because one of my real concerns is that there's a lot of hyperventilating and bloviating about AI, and I think we got to, calm down a little bit and start to deal with the issues. The issues are not that hard when we get into it. There are risks, obviously. It's an unregulated area, except for the EU in general. Let's dig into it a little bit. Um, the risk lands, the AI risk land within your company obviously matters. And there are definite high risk uses, there are lower risk uses, and we're going to talk about that, and it's important to differentiate about that. The main thing I'm going to argue for is that there should be some governance structure and accountability related to this. In other words, this can't be just done by compliance. It just be done by the legal shop. This requires, from the board on down, a governance structure like any other type of risk. Remember, there's a lot of human risk here. This is like cybersecurity in some respects, in that human risk is really what we're talking about mitigating in uh, many, respects. We'll talk about sort of the core legal and compliance concepts. There's been some regulatory developments. I'll show you some investment cases already. And then at the very end, we'll talk a little bit about just building a compliance program, which is not going to be that in depth. I mean, we could almost do another program on that easily. So let's get into the issue. And the risk is definitely accelerating. And you see rapid adoption across the business functions. I'll give you a story. One of my clients says, "Yeah, we're going to be dealing with. We're setting up a committee. We're going to, sure that we do this, in a real way." And we were doing a risk and compliance program assessment, and we talked to the finance people. I said, "What do you think about AI?" And they go, "Oh, we're already using it." And they were using it to go through, invoices and anomalies and all that. But other parts of the business or the company weren't even aware of that. And we're seeing employees that are, engaging use of AI tools, and we call that the shadow AI. And also remember, AI is embedded in third-party platforms. So you can end up getting exposed to AI without even knowing it. And so be very careful about that. That's why I argue for a pretty good governance structure. And we're getting, because of the anxiety that's surrounding AI, we're getting more regulatory and enforcement focus on it. So as soon as it becomes big, then all of a sudden, people respond to it, and regulators, just like anybody, they're the tail end of this process, but they're going to start hammering some companies. The main thing, just like, and remember the term, and you're going to see so many terms from the compliance, toolbox here, that's what helps to break down the sort of concept that we're scared about. AI this, AI that, ventilate about that. Use your compliance tools that you're all really comfortable with and use it in a way to address this issue. So, line of sight is an issue that I've always pushed. Compliance should have line of sight across the organization, and they know a lot of what's going on across the organization because of that line of sight. They need that line of sight. It's a critical part to your ethics and compliance program. Same goes for AI risks. You need to have a line of sight across the organization to know who's using it and what use cases are out there. The other thing is that if you have embedded uses that you don't know about and errors start or bias starts to enter into the system, those scale up and the impact can be very quick and very significant. So there's evolving risks that occur because AI technologies improve and AI sophistication and the of our users, of our humans who are using it, are definitely increasing as well. So the traditional controls may be ineffective. You may have to update your controls, but this is the AI risk sort of area and set of parameters that you have to look at and make sure you're there. Now, how you deploy and use AI and how it's governed within your company is it reflects on, in other words, it's a reflection of your culture to begin with. It reflects how you make decisions. One example that I saw from a client, which was not a good example, here's an example of how not to do it, is the CEO sends out a email and to each of the sort of division heads, including compliance, including legal, and says, tell me how many people we can reduce in terms of headcount in your division or in your operation through the use of AI. Well, I mean, talk about a way to scare out of everyone. That's not the way to deploy AI. That's not the way to think about AI. There's so many more subtle issues that are involved in how you use it. But what do you think the message was that was sent in that case where the CEO sends out this message? This is a true story. And I can't think of a worse way to, introduce AI as a concept to the business. So the weak culture, if you have a weak culture, that's going to lead to people committing, employees embrace it themselves, deploying it themselves, using it themselves, and then it's going to lead to shortcuts and potential error. And then again, with the scaling issue, if a complete, that finance department that I uncovered was using it unbeknownst to somebody else, what if they started to make errors in the way they were monitoring the financial operations of the company? So ethical failures also often precede compliance failures. Again, a concept that we know. That's why we have a code of conduct that prohibits certain activities that are not necessarily illegal, but can be a precursor to illegal behavior. So culture, remember, link your AI, be honest about what your corporate culture is, and make sure that you have the strength of culture to put in place an structure and start to regulate the use cases. So here, a case study, for example, was of one set of risks that came about if an employee, for example, inputs confidential or proprietary data about people or customers or businesses, and then the data ends up being stored and then it's reused. and then it's reused externally. And all of a sudden, we've got no malicious intent. The person didn't know that the confidential or proprietary data was going to be exposed to a third party, an outsider, and all of a sudden you've got legal, privacy, and reputational risks, defamation, or privacy, who knows. So these are the kinds of things that can quickly snowball into trouble in your data situation. Now, what we need to do early on in assessing what our AI risks is. Each use case carries different levels of risk. Some affect individuals directly, others are just internal. So it requires a risk-based compliance approach and not one size fits all set of controls. So let's talk about AI risks. The biggest determinant of AI risks is, in the use case, are you making decisions through an algorithmic type of formula that AI applies? Now, what are the typical use cases where this comes up? Most people are not in this category. I'd be surprised, out of all the people who are attending today, if more than 10% of our audience are in high risk AI application. So hiring and recruitment decisions, are you using your algorithm? Are you using AI to make cuts, recommendations, anything with regard to hiring and recruitment? And be careful. When you say, recruitment, we want to publicize the availability of jobs in this area where we factory. What organizations are there that we can use to promote job application recruitment? Well, be careful, because you don't know how that algorithm, how does AI identify all of the recruitment decisions and making sure and identifying agencies or places that, or nonprofits or whatever, people that can help to spread the word. Make sure there's not a bias that's built into it. And the one thing I've learned with AI through legal work is AI makes mistakes. AI habitations. And here, to me, this is a huge risk area for people in terms of hiring and recruitment, because it doesn't bring you the full panoply of opportunities or scope that you may need. What about credit, price, or eligibility determinations? Again, these may invoke or implicate uses of algorithms that could then be challenged for fairness, for bias, for discrimination. Similarly, we run into issues with regard to healthcare or safety related systems, and this is compounded by, across all of these, data privacy. How about healthcare information? Okay, you're going to run into protected information. How are we going to make sure of that? Using it in connection with diagnoses. Now, everybody goes to the doctor, and the doctor may say, okay, I'm going to use AI to transcribe our meeting. Do you have a problem with that? And that to me, that's a productivity issue. That's not a buy issue. But when we're talking about, as deliverers of healthcare safety and protecting people, we have to be careful in those areas. These are high risk AI applications and use cases that have to have specific high risk formulations in terms of this. So be very careful in terms of defining your use cases and where you may end up with situations that implicate these kind of algorithmic decisions within there. Now, What are the lower risk AI applications? And we all kind of know those: in terms of drafting documents and emails, internal research and summarization, write a paragraph that does this, workflow productivity tools. Now, there's still risks that are involved, and we'll talk about that: intellectual property, data privacy, but the risk level is much lower. And I contend, and my gut tells me these days, just in work clients, that the bulk of the risk areas fall into here and fall into this area. If your business is not in real estate, if your business is not in credit, banking and providing credit, to consumers, then if you're using the lower risk, that doesn't low risk, it can still be medium risk, but all of this area, this can lead to greater productivity. And here's where I think that there are real tangible benefits to using AI. Even though, from a legal standpoint, I'll tell you, I've seen tons of mistakes, and I'd never rely upon it for legal research or anything like that. To me, that still requires using the older tools. However, our marshaling arguments, writing, sometimes sizing ideas, those productivity and workflow tools can be very helpful. You just got to make sure that you're addressing the risks. So what are some of the hidden risks? Okay. And I love some of the terminology that's developing in this area. But mainly, look, you have confidential data, and leakage can occur through a prompt, through what you write into AI, or the instruction given to AI, and all of that. And that confidential data and leakage, because there's no guarantee that, let's say, your department is using AI, no guarantee that what you put in may not end up being leaked out through somebody else's prompt or one of your prompts, and that could then end up going to a third party, and then you're in trouble with confidential data. Hallucinations, which I love the term hallucinations, or incorrect outputs. And there's a case, for example, hallucinations are just like incorrect stuff, and it happens. And what scares me about this is I know the law. I know, and I can quickly verify law, and I've seen a lot of hallucinations in this area. And then over reliance without verification. This is probably the number one issue that I spend time on, is you have to verify the information somehow. You can't just wholesale lift it and use it. There's got to be some verification techniques. And that brings in humans, and that brings in human error, but that's some of the things to be about. And informal and undocumented use. People work at home, let's say. They have an AI chat account. They use it there and then put it into, work documents. You don't know what they're doing, or they have it on their phone and they use it through the phone, and then that helps them. Then they put it back into their work function. So be careful. So you have to, just like anything, take your third parties. We break them down into high risk, medium risk, low risk. That's what I'm saying you need to do here again. Decision impacting AI is your highest risk. In other words, AI that causes you to make decisions that have an impact on stakeholders and most applicants, customers, that type of thing. Tier 2 is going to be your customer-facing AI, where you may use it for interactions. Let's say you have a chat bot on your website, other things like that. You've got to be careful about what you're doing with regard to AI in that use. And then tier 3 is going to be what we just went through, your workflow and productivity tools. Tier 3 definitely still has risks, as I'll show you. And the controls have to be tailored to the risk level. And what the main part of your controls is human review, human verification, human steps that are needed in a control, in implementing the controls. And that's the way you get at the issues, because I'm sorry to say that AI is not going to get rid of humans, and humans are really important here for variation purposes and for research purposes, in terms of verification of the information that you're getting. So risk tiering matters. And look, this is just like any other risk that you face. We tier the risks and we develop controls and we assign resources based upon the risk level. And these four concepts that are listed here could be the same thing that is used for third-party risk. So, for example, you focus compliance resources effectively by risk tiering. You prevent over-responding or regulating lower risk activities. You ensure that there are stronger controls for higher risk activities, and you align your governance then with your business operations in a tailored way to make sure that risk is mitigated. So AI governance to me is critical. And AI governance is really a business issue that cuts across organization. So we're not going to let IT run all of AI. You can't do it that way because it impacts legal, compliance, HR operations, and the business operations. It requires sort of an enterprise-wide viewpoint. And the governance must be cross-functional, meaning, legal handles things, HR handles some things, IT handles some things. So this is why we need a governance structure. I cannot under recommend that. I can't underemphasize the importance of AI governance in environment. Because if you don't set up the structure to go over to sort of implement this in a deliberate way, you're going to end up in a situation where you're catching up and you're going to discover activities that have been occurring, let's say, for a long time without you knowing about it. And that's what we got to try to avoid. So AI governance is a big business issue. And the structure has to be like anything else that we do in terms of risk and risk mitigation. The board or the audit committee has to conduct oversight. And the audit committee is getting just overused burden with regard to cybersecurity, data privacy. Now add on to it AI technology. Is the audit committee per place, or are we going to, see some kind of new structures and new committees used? I always worry about the audit committee being overburdened, but we need to have senior management accountability and an AI governance committee at the senior level with legal and compliance, with IT, with HR representatives. And then the business unit, like every issue that we talk about in compliance, is responsible for the use in one way or another. So there's got to be an AI governance structure. The audit committee or the committee's charter has to be amended to include this. There has to be some sort of senior management organization that is accountable for this or just made clear to them. But the governance committee can be the vehicle by which management exercises accountability through, let's say, having the governance committee report to, who CISO, if you want, or have the CISO on the AI governance committee. CISO, I mean Chief Information Services Officer. And the business unit, like everything, has to be responsible, just like third-party risk. Okay, the business unit has to take some responsibility for identifying, monitoring uses and making sure that those uses are permitted and have been reviewed and approved in the end. The board's responsibilities, just like cybersecurity, they have to be trained and understand the AI risks and the exposures. What are the risks for your business? Where is AI used and where is it to be used in your business? And standing at each level and each use case, what are the risks and exposures? And so we need to ensure that we're on top of that. This is not as hard as it is, I'm not trying to make it sound hard. This is not as we think. Because let's take, for example, in the beginning, I told you about how the finance of a client was using AI to look for anomalies in invoices that were coming in. And they were searching for those and they were programmed for those. Well, what's your risk in that situation? It's going to be that it's inaccurate. Or what's your risk that you don't want to make sure that there's leakage of data from the finance team to, let's say, other vendors or to customers or whatever, that there's no leakage of the data that's being generated in looking for anomalies. But your risk is that they don't catch the anomaly or they identify anomalies that are not really anomalies. It's kind of like a hallucination. So understanding your risks and exposures in that situation, that limited situation, in my view, the AI risks are pretty low and your exposure to risk is low. So that's what I'm saying. It's not involved in any decision making in the sense of towards a customer, but it's looking for potential anomalies, trying to make you more productive in the review and monitoring of financial operations. So the board has to understand what the risks are and the exposures, and they have to understand and oversee the governance framework. In other words, the committee should report just like whoever's taking responsibility for this, say it's legal and compliance or whatever, there should be some reporting. And there should be accountability in reporting, quarterly, whatever, because AI is such a big hot topic these days. Give them the information they need to sort of monitor it and to calm it down. And AI then can also be used in enterprise risk. And there, that's a higher risk activity, in my view, than sort of looking for anomalies in a financial set of data. But nonetheless, I think the board should be looking like integrating AI into enterprise risk in terms of what risk profile does that create for us in terms of this, okay? And that should be, just like anti-corruption, data privacy, AI has to be viewed as a potential risk by the board, and they have to take a look at it. Senior management is responsible, in my view, for what is our AI risk appetite? What are our use cases? What are the risks? What are the costs versus the benefits? And approve, I think any high risk use case has to be reviewed and approved by senior management. That's just no doubt about it. And it has to go to some review process where management is aware of it, and then senior management can help in the mitigation and ensuring that there are adequate resources to mitigate those risks as well. And senior management has to make sure that there is proper coordination across the functions to make sure that all the people are working together. HR works with clients and legal, and finance is working with everybody in this area to make sure that everybody's carrying out what they have to do. And then we go back to our 3 lines of defense. What a surprise. Is incorporated, integrated into this. And I hope nobody's walking around saying, wow, these are new concepts in the AI area that, compliance is advancing itself. No, compliance is doing what it normally does. The business is doing what it normally does, which is they have to be on the front line of mitigating a risk. And here it's responsible AI use. Business use cases have to be somehow scrutinized and approved in the beginning, and to make sure that you are using these things in the proper way. There's a consistent review process and a consistent deployment process where you have controls in place to make sure that certain risks are mitigated. And compliance and legal oversee policy and oversight. And internal audit and monitoring will do independent testing and checking. And we'll use this framework to adjust and to monitor the activities of the business, making sure that the policies are being followed, and making sure that there's testing and monitoring of the activities to ensure that these authorized uses are as far as the use case goes. So our core governance controls, besides having a committee, in terms of having, a proper AI use committee, is we have to have an acceptable use policy. There has to be an AI policy, depending, that is tailored to the risks that we're talking about. Tailored to the risks that we're talking about in terms of, because the risks may vary within the uses within the organization. So it's not one risk. There may be a high risk function, and then there are lower risk functions that are more productivity oriented. And we have to have testing and model validation in terms of how our acceptable policy is working, monitoring and audit processes, and the approval of any AI deployment. In other words, there has to be an approval and documentation procedure. You can't just say, okay, procurement, go out and get us AI. It just can't work like that. Because there's too much in the way of risk that is involved in this situation. To me, it's akin to third-party risk in a lot of ways, in terms of looking at how you're going to do this. And remember, what we're talking about here is human behavior. Human behavior is what drives AI risk. What prompts do humans use? What information are they seeking? What products and outputs are they looking for? And AI amplifies human decisions, whether they're poor or they're good ones. They're going to be amplified through AI. So like I said early on, poor judgment scales quickly. In other words, cutting corners, making poor judgments, take risks with confidential data, can scale quickly as more and more people adopt and use AI within the organization. And employees are the primary control point. And that makes total sense when you think about it. And that, just like with cybersecurity, training is absolutely critical here. Getting to everyone as quickly as you can who might use AI is absolutely essential. So think of it, you have, and it's interesting because you have certain elements that are like third party risk and procedures that are needed, but you also have the human factor here, just like cybersecurity. So it's a kind of mix of, the work that we've done in other areas is coming together in this AI context. So employee risk can be also shadow use, unauthorized or unapproved AI use, which I think is occurring to a large extent right now. Uploading sensitive or confidential data, misinterpreting the AI outputs, or taking AI outputs and not validating it, and unawareness of the risks. And these all why it's important to have a governance structure so that nobody starts using any AI unless it's approved as a use case, that we know what people are doing, that we have for outputs validation processes to make sure output before we use it and publicize it or use it, out facing externally, that we make sure it is verified. And obviously, people who operate without any recognition or concept of the risk have to be, that is again, something that can really become difficult. So, and this, just to complicate things even more, we've had plenty of talk about third-party risk. We've talked about third-party risk with regard to cybersecurity. In other words, a third party comes aboard, they don't have they don't have data security, and then boom, we end up bearing the brunt of this, problem, and something collapses. Take the Target data case from 15 years ago, 12 years ago. That was a weak third party who was an air conditioning repair person who ended up, because of their poor practices and poor data security, being the cause of Target's financial disaster. So now we're getting into a situation where we are going to hire third parties. They have themselves AI risks, and we're not getting disclosures. So these are vendors who use AI in one way or another and don't tell us. And this limited visibility, we don't have the same line of sight into a third party, as we all know, and into their data use and how they use it and their privacy purposes. And they may themselves even have subcontractors who are using AI tools. So again, we're faced with an issue of what kind of disclosures do we get from our vendors before we onboard them, and what kind of contractual provisions are we including in our contracts or purchase orders or whatever in terms of assurances with regard to AI risks, because we can be held accountable in the hiring of these third parties. So we now need to look at our due diligence system, and I know everybody's rolling their eyes at this moment, going, I built my system. Now I've got to take account of yet another risk. And fortunately, this means what kind of due diligence do we have to do with regard to AI use? Control provisions, data and audit rights, monitoring and clear accountability, and then the ability to come in and order. Now, cybersecurity gives us a model to follow with regard to this. But remember, again, with third parties, we're talking about different risks. They're going to have high use cases. They're going to have low uses, lower use cases. So again, we have to be flexible as to how we assign risk to our third parties with regard to AI uses and their use cases. So we need some disclosure. We may need inquiries to add in as well. Now, in the AI context, we run into, and we're going to talk data privacy, intellectual property, and trade secrets, all of that, and or sensitive data that is used in AI raises data risks again, and privacy risks. Cross-border data transfer issues in the EU, if we're using AI, can occur. So we need to look at our data privacy situation. We also have to take into account how AI is gaining access to this. If, for example, we are, let's say, using it in a hiring context what kind of cross-border data transfers that we might have in the EU. We also have to be aware in the United States about certain states, and because we don't have a federal system, but we have to be careful in terms of our control over the data and regulatory exposures under GDPR and all of the various country data restrictions. Cross-border, to me, is where you're going to see some issues arise in the AI context, particularly if it's used in the HR function. So, intellectual property risks. So, who owns the outputs that come out from prompts? And we're not so clear on that. And there's litigation going right now about, I think I saw Anthropic was being sued by someone who was claiming that their outputs were incorporating copyrighted data and copyrighted information and materials, and therefore they were being sued. And this, to me, we're still there. This issue is sticking out. Training data, for example, may include copyrighted material. Trade secrets can be exposed prompts, and we have to be careful. In other words, when people put in documents into Chat, GPT, or whatever you're using, then you're going to run into situations where does the document itself include confidential or trade material? And there's going to be then licensing issues that come up and usage uncertainties. This is really just a fast developing area. I'm afraid it's going to be through litigation that this risk is being, asked. So I think it's really kind of, we've got to be careful here and sort of monitor those cases but we're at a very early stage in terms of the big issues that are going to be resolved somehow. There's going to be settlements or something that's going to be done, or there's going to be sharing of money somehow that this can't go on in terms of litigation after litigation. Because otherwise, there's no regulatory system in the U.S. and it is still sort of waiting to see what type of situation's gonna come. And so that's why I say it's kind of an interesting type of situation right now. Okay, let's talk about bias and ethics risk. So you can also have bias that's embedded in training data. You can also discriminatory outcomes that I mentioned to you, for example, in recruitment efforts, or to try to get employees or get people to apply for positions. We want to make sure that we don't have any bias that is in relying on any output that comes from AI. And these raise regulatory and reputational risks, and I'll show you some cases. We're going to talk about some enforcement actions that have occurred in this area as well. And there are ethical issues here of, are we operating consistent with our code? And are we, tilting in the wrong way? And that is not necessarily a legal violation, but may be a violation of our code of conduct in terms of ethical values, ethical precepts, and concepts that are not necessarily violations, but raise code of conduct concerns. So this is an area, and again, this begs the question of making sure we have a functional committee that really takes a look at some of the use cases here as well and understands your business and how that works. So the regulatory landscape, at least right now, looks like we have the EU AI Act, which is the risk-based framework and is probably the pretty active area, but we have two other areas in the US that have EEOC that is definitely looking at this issue with regard to bias as well. So, oh, I just got a note that the sound seems to be going in and out. I apologize for that. Hopefully it's better now. I just had affected the the volume level. So let me know if it's still a problem. Anyways, enforcement examples. I want to show you some FTC actions on deceptive AI and data practices. EEOC focuses on hiring discrimination, GDPR enforcement for data misuse, and courts that are sanctioning AI misuse for, let's say, hallucinations. And I think it's kind of ironic that the hallucination cases come up with lawyers, okay? And lawyers are known for their hallucinations in more ways than one. Okay, EU regulatory example, GDPR and AI. And here we had a case or cases where facial recognition database was built from scraped images and used without consent across jurisdictions. And the GDPR violations involved unlawful data processing. And there was a lack of transparency and a legal basis for this. So fines were issued across EU jurisdictions in the millions of euros, and orders to delete data and cease processing. And so what happened was there was an AI model built on this unlawful data, and that triggered the EU enforcement. With the facial recognition type of data violation preceding the use of AI with the improper data. So that just shows you that how you use it, what you do with improper data, and the AI just made it even more egregious in that the manipulation and moving around of data and the use of it in the AI context made it more egregious in that there were more uses of the facial recognition. Here's a case, Getty Images, and this is an allegation that there is copyrighted images that are used to train an AI model. So this is what I was talking with the Anthropic as well. And the outputs that come out of this potentially replicate protected works, and a copyright infringement case was filed. Now, there's litigation in Europe about this. There's litigation in the United States about this. I think it went up in the UK as well. And so this is the unauthorized use of proprietary data. So ongoing litigation, potential damages, and injunctive relief. And the training data risk is one of the most significant unresolved legal issues in AI. So I think the case is in Delaware and California, but this is something versus Stability AI. This is something to monitor and to make sure with regard to copyrighted images used to train an AI model. Okay, so we have to be careful with regard to this as well. Now we had the FTC going against, and it's like, how many times does Weight Watchers get sued? And this was called AI washing, AI claims, and they ended up paying 1.5 million civil penalty. And they were marketing, this is unbelievable to me, an AI-driven weight loss app for children. And they collected sensitive personal data, including minors. I mean, this is, I don't know who approved this, but it's just crazy to me. And misrepresented data practices and safeguards and the deception under the FTC Act. And you also had Children Online Protection Act COPA violations and collection and retention of children's data. And there was misleading AI called AI washing and data representations in the collection of this data. So like their terms of use must have had things that were really not true. So they paid a civil penalty. There were algorithms used in this, and think about it how it would in terms of depending upon the child's data, there may have been certain recommendations that were made. And so now the regulators required both the deletion of the data and the model itself, which is pretty unbelievable. We had another bias case, algorithm bias case, FTC versus Everalbum. Again, facial recognition technology used without consent. The users were misled about how the biometric data was used, and the deceptive practices related to the AI capabilities and the use of biometric data. And again, they required deletion of the facial recognition data and the models as well. And so improper data use invalidated the entire AI system, but there were deceptive practices relating to the AI capabilities. So again, what AI is going to do for you, exactly what it's going to do for you, you have to be careful about this. EEOC enforcement in terms of hiring bias risk. So we had EEOC guidance that was issued in 23, 24, employers using AI tools for hiring and screening. Now this again is just a concern, and the risk of the disparate impact on protected groups led to Title VII discrimination, failure to validate the hiring tool, and reliance on biased algorithms. So this is just something that the EEOC is just hot to trot on, and for obvious reasons. AI is not the be all and end all here, and you can't outsource your discrimination risk to AI because AI tool itself could be biased, and then you're liable for it. Now, data privacy and AI came up in an interesting case, FTC versus BetterHelp. Sensitive health data was shared with third parties for advertising purposes. Representations, again, to the users as to the use of the health data were misleading. We had deceptive data practices and a $7.8 million settlement, and a ban on sharing health data for advertising. There had to be privacy safeguards, and the same data risks apply to AI training and prompts. And data was misused ultimately in the advertisements, through that were created through AI, using processing the data itself. And this triggered an enforcement action. Here's your lawyer hallucination case where in the legal risks, a personal injury case was dismissed because the attorneys used AI-generated legal citations. I can tell you from experience, I've had citations for cases, and then I went and looked at the case, and the case had nothing to do with what it was being cited for. And that scared me beyond belief, such that AI has got to be taken with a grain of salt. And verification is critical. I would verify any citation I get, and 9 times out of 10, they don't stand for what they claim. Personal injury case was dismissed. The citations were fabricated. The sanctions imposed by the federal court and reputational harm. There's a case I know with a lawyer who's now under ethics review because he used AI to file a document. And then guess what happened after that? They told him don't do it again, and he did it again. And he did it again. So it just is crazy. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. Got a great question here, and I want to take a break just to go through it. If we were to set up initial risk triage questions to decide whether the AI use case is a low, medium, or high risk, what kind of privacy related questions would be most relevant to ask up front in order to determine the risk levels of the AI use case? Well, there you know, is there going to be use of any personal data? In other words, take the definitions from GDPR or whatever, any information that can identify an individual, be it an address, be it a date of birth, be it a name, anything like that, and then you can try to get get your arms around what kind of risk you're talking about. So your compliance framework, again, and it's great, that leads into a great question. The question leads into this topic: risk assessment and inventory any AI uses, policies and procedures. You need an AI use policy, training and communications. Remember human error. Remember awareness is critical. Monitoring and auditing the uses to make sure that humans aren't using them in the wrong way. And have an incident response. How do you respond to a potential problem, and how do you get at it? Okay. Um, Here's another great question. Do employees have a case if they demand employer or go after their employer for having them indirectly training AI to eventually take their jobs? Wow. Now that is interesting. And I don't know that they have a use case in that, a legal case in that, but I'll tell you what, you'd have to look at that carefully. That's a great question. And boy, it just smells wrong to me, but on the other hand, I'd have to look at that a little bit more. So quick checklist for you, quick wins, takeaways. Let's make this happen. Inventory your AI tools and use cases, assign governance responsibility, issue a policy as quickly as you can, train employees as rapidly as you can, look at your key vendors who may be using AI, and remember this is enterprise wide and driven by human behavior. AI risk is not about technology, it is about how people use it within the organization. So we'll get back to this issue when we can, to talk more about compliance and things like that. Let me just run my poll. It's great to hear from everybody. If you need assistance with, putting together, let's say, your governance documents, your use case, please reach out to me. I could be happy to help you in any respect, obviously in this area. But this is it's a big enough issue that we got to take a quick look at this and make sure that everything is okay. I think there's still a lot of exaggeration out there, hyperventilating, bloviating, whatever you want to call it. So don't feed into it. The process of putting this together in working with some clients on this issue has sort of, it brings down the temperature level with regard to this. So be careful with regard to this issue. Be aware of it and be mindful of it. I think it would be good. I'll probably try to do an AI compliance type of um, webinar down the road to talk about, as we see sort of some of these cases resolved and get a better picture in terms of the regulatory framework. I did see a proposal come out of the White House with regard to preempting state regulation of AI and putting in place a federal AI type of framework. So we'll see what happens with that. That's important to watch over, and you want to make sure, uh, you know, that we stay on top of that issue. Anyways, folks, again, if you need a copy of the slides, email me, mvolkoff@volkofflaw.com. Feel free to call, text anytime, and we'll be in touch, okay? All the best to everybody, and be good.